back before GPS and stuff like that, all the young apprentices had to spend time on shore duty with my dad, learning how to change the oil and the launches and how to run it differently than full ahead and full astern and that kind of thing. And at that time, the launches were maintained right across from what was then and what is now the Lewis Yacht Club, but at that time was Westcott's oil dock. So launches were maintained there, and the apprentices would circle through and spend time with my father, a week or 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that. I can't remember, Dickie. You probably didn't have to do it because you're so young, but you did have to. So anyway, these were all really cool guys. I mean, they were all, of George's vintage, and they were cool. Later when Buckaloo became a pilot, they kind of lowered the standards, and not quite so cool. But in those days, they were really, really cool. And it was not unusual for the apprentices to stop by our house. We lived right across from the DuPont Children's Home on Lewis Beach. It was not unusual for the apprentices to stop by and have a drink or a beer with my father, after work, or sometimes even on weekends. So that was not unusual. But it turned out George was showing up an awful lot. And when he showed up, he seemed to be spending a lot of time looking at my sister, who at the time was like 16 years old, maybe even 15. I don't know, she's very young. And so, George had come, George came from a very nice family and so forth, so that was all fine. But there was this big age difference, and my father couldn't quite tell, and my mother, whether or not George was showing up because he kind of liked being with my father, or whether he was showing up because he kind of had his eye on Patsy. So after several of these questionable visits, I don't know, it was one after 5 o'clock one day, maybe it was a weekday, maybe it was a weekend, George, pulled up, and George had this really cool Model A Ford painted red. The paint came from Fox's drugs variety store, for those of you who remember Fox's. So he pulls up in his Model A, and my father's out working in the garage. And, George comes walking up, and my father says, "Hi, George, it's, great to see you." He said, "It's after 5 o'clock. I'm about to have a beer." And he said, "I tell you, you're over 21. If you'd like to have a beer, if you've come to see me and you'd like to have a beer," he said, "I think that'd be great." He said, "On the other hand, if you've come to see Patsy, who's not over 21, we'd be glad to offer you a soft drink." So, George, what's it going to be? So George kind of got a little smile on his face, realized that maybe the code would be broken, and he said, "I tell you what, Bob, I think I'll go for the Coke." And there you go, folks. The rest is history, as we all know. What do I do with this now?
Hey, you're fine.
Eric Quick, and I know John Huckel's here. My son was here, but I don't know if he had to go on.
Are you going to talk into that?
No. Can you hear me?
No.
Whoa. George Macintire went to St. Andrews, and I went to St. Andrews also, but he was a lot older than I was. And you're older than I am, too, as a matter of fact. But, enough about you. George Macintire's mother taught me to play bridge, and which occupied, I was in the 10th grade, I guess. It occupied the rest of my time at St. Andrews and my 1 year at the University of Delaware before I went on the pilot boat. But George and I think, got very close. And I tell this story, and I hope I can get through it. Because my son was 17 months old, and he contracted Hong Kong flu. And they called me off the pilot boat. I was out there for the week. And I came in, and I went in the hospital, and I stopped by my father-in-law's place of business on the way back to the pilot boat. And George happened to come in. I was working the mate's watch from midnight till 6 in the morning. And George says, "How you doing?" And I told him not very well. Bill Henry was close to death, as we found out, but he's around here somewhere. So he made it through that. But he says, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm on the way back to the pilot boat to work the watch. And George says, you're not going back on the pilot boat. Now, he was a full-fledged pilot. I was an apprentice. And he said, I'm going on the pilot boat. And he did. He said, you get back to your son where you should be. And he did stay in my watch. There's no sense in kidding around something like that, and that's what I wanted to say to everybody. George was a hell of a man.
Thank you, Dickie. What, no jokes? No, never mind, no. Oh, that's neat.
It's probably going to be easier. There you go.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ward. Okay. Anybody else brave enough to get up? Why are you shaking your head? No. Didn't you play? Who? Oh, Jay-Z. Hi, sweetheart. Here's another St. Andrew in and a pilot. How are you?
Fine,
Good.
Patsy, how are you?
Good to see you. I'm hanging in there.
Remember when I was painting the house and you were hanging out the window looking at me?
I don't remember everything.
Painting your father's house.
Okay.
I was so sure it's supposed to be working on boats, but Bob kind of sucked me up the house. Doing real painting. You used to look out the window, get on the windows, talk to me while I was painting.
That's neat, John.
I knew George for a long time. He lived across the street from me. I was raised in the historical house, and many years ago, my parents bought it for $4,000. And in those days, when George was, well, he's 3 years younger, I guess, than I am. Bill Burton, Hick Rowland, Sandra, myself, George, we all played in the street. We played softball or kickball or whatever. There weren't many cars that went down the street in those days. And, but we had a lot of fun together. And when we finished doing that, we'd go down to my house that had a lot of large maples, and we would climb trees. When my parents bought that house, I was 4, and we had a barn out back, and we used to play in the barn until somebody finally fell through the floor into a rowboat that was being stored. And I look back on it, and my parents, their parents, nobody ever came out, nobody ever checked on us. I look at it and I think, Bill Burton finally fell out of a tree, and I ran for my mother, who was a nurse, and she said, he's all right, don't get excited, and had the breath knocked out of him, I guess. But as I said, nobody checked on us in those days. We had a wonderful life. We walked to the movies and we walked home in the dark, and it was wonderful. And George was indeed a very special person. He was quiet and gentle. I never heard him say anything bad about anybody. He was just a very special gentleman all his life, as far as I was concerned. And I love Patsy. She used to babysit for me on the beach when John was working for Bob, and we lived on the beach in an apartment, and Patsy would babysit. So.
And you delivered letters you weren't supposed to deliver.
I did? What?
I was not allowed to write to George because my mother was always afraid that there would be something in the letters that wasn't right. And I've got them all. My kids can read them all. They were just really what he did during the day. So Jaycee would go down to the pilot boat and she would get George's letters that he had written to me. And my mother never knew about it until she arrived at the front door one day with this stack of letters, opens the front door and says to me in front of my mother, "Here's all the letters that George has been writing to you." You don't remember that?
No. It's probably a good thing I don't. No, I don't remember the letters. I do remember our discussions about, what were you going to do? There was George and there was your parents and
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Jaycee. You're welcome. Yeah.
I'm Bill Landon. I was a friend of George, and George was a friend of mine. Good friends in the later years of his life. I was his assistant in the cemetery. I was on session with him. I was his football buddy. So we both died together watching the Eagles for many years. And I remember one time he said, "Bill," he said, "I've lost 16 pounds." And I said, "Wow, that's great, George." So I always put out a spread that wouldn't quit for George. I knew what he liked. I knew all the special cheeses and all the good stuff. He loved nuts, and I'd have all that stuff out there. So I got feeling guilty, because he was coming over to the house to watch a game, and I thought, no, I can't put this out. He's lost 16 pounds, and he's going to lose some more here. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and set everything up, but I'll get some vegetables and put them out on a tray and put them between us, So the pastor's right. He's quiet at times. So he looked at me, and he looked at me again, and he says, "I don't like broccoli." And he said, "I don't like cauliflower." And I said, "George, that's all we have here." He said, I know. So I went in the kitchen, and I got the tray that we normally have, and I put it down. He said, "We're really friends, aren't we?" And I said, "Yeah."
As my husband Bill said, George was our friend, and we were blessed to become acquainted with George and Patsy when we moved back to Lewis. 2005. And we happened to live, we bought a home right across the street from George's childhood home. So it was kind of fun as we were fixing up that house and wondering about the early history of the house to get information, firsthand information from George. But what I wanted to say was that my husband and I had a nickname for George that we called him behind his back that he didn't know. And I'll tell you now what it was. It wasn't bad. It was Gentleman George. Because George was unfailingly polite and kind and considerate. And my husband and I both cherish memories of times that we spent with George and Patsy.
He would always come in the front door, and we always had brick steps that were kind of, when he got to be 80, I thought, and I'd watch him get up there. And I thought, "George, you don't have to do that. Go around the side on Chip Carpenter's side. It's only 2 steps and come in." He said, "My parents always taught me to go in the front door." I mean, that's great. I could say a lot, so I want to give this up.
We got to know George after we were all retired, and we moved here, and we were in choir and church together, and Bob and George were on session, and Patsy, of course, said, "You want to come to Bible study, and you don't say no to Patsy." So I was in Bible study with Patsy for a long time. I see you, Randy. You don't say no to Patsy. But we found that we had time on our hands, so we decided, wouldn't it be fun to travel together? And my son has a travel agency that specializes in deaf. He and his wife are not deaf, but they travel with 80 deaf sometimes. So Patsy and George and Bob and I were the non-deaf, and we went to Alaska together. we got to sit in the front of the bus because we didn't have to watch the sign language. So we got the best seats, and we sat in the front of the bus. We went to Ireland and then on to Scotland and Wales and England. And did we end up in France? Yes, we went through the Channel, and we had great adventures together. And George, at that time, was having trouble with his hips and trouble walking. And he felt badly that he was having to move slowly. But we liked it because we got to ride on a golf cart because George had trouble walking. And we said, well, we'll all ride with you. That's fine with us. So we had wonderful times. And then we had a trip planned. The four of us were going to the Caribbean, and George came down with the real flu and the night before and had to cancel. So Bob and I went off on a cruise, sitting at a table with 2 empty chairs, just the 2 of us, and missing them every day. And then our plan was we'll go down the Mississippi, or we'll go down the Chesapeake. So George was always gung-ho for an adventure, and the 4 of us were really looking forward to it. And then God changed the plan. And we know George is in a better place, but we miss our traveling buddy.
Well, Ruthie and I moved to Lewis. Well, we live in Covey Creek, which is just outside of Lewis. Anyway, 17 years ago. And we met George and Patsy at church, like all of us met at church. Most of us here met at church. And George and I were golfers together. I don't know if you want to call it that we were golfers, but we played golf. We played on the golf course. But anyway, we always had a great time. George was always, like you say, he was always a gentleman. I never heard, if he made a bad shot, you never heard George cuss. He would never cuss about it. But anyway, I wanted to tell a real quick story. Patsy, George, Ruthie, and I went on a bus trip to Philadelphia. And so in Philadelphia, well, George was in Philadelphia how many days a week out of a year's time, because he would take a ship up there. And then, of course, he knew the best restaurant to eat at, which was Old Town Tavern, I think it was. So we walked, I don't know how, and George was hurting. You mentioned how his hip was really bad, and he had a difficult time walking a great distance from where we had to go to this town tavern. Well, anyway, we get into this tavern, and Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, everybody ate in this tavern. So I thought, boy, I really feel so proud that I'm eating in the same place, and George had ushered us there. Well, we're sitting at this long table, and the waitress comes around, and she hands us a menu. It's about this wide and about this long. And she comes, and they filled all these goblets up with water, and they were big goblets. And so I take my menu, and I open it up, and I push my goblet over, and it goes right down through the middle of this real long table, water right down through it. Well, I was so embarrassed. Patsy, George, don't worry about it. You'll be, they'll take care of it. So they moved us to another table, and they cleaned this table up. But anyhow, it was a wonderful experience with them. I always had a great time with them, and I just feel bad that we kept saying over the last maybe 5 or 6 years, we're going to go out to dinner. When are we going to go out to dinner? And we never made it to dinner with George. But we're going to take Patsy, I guarantee her. I don't want to hear, no, we can't come this time or that, whatever. Anyway, George I considered him a really great friend, and he was a gentleman's gentleman. Doc knows George real well.
I only sang with George in a quartet for 22 years. I got to say, I got 3 things to say about George. First thing is that the preacher was wrong about one thing he said in his homily today. He said, whenever George had something to say, You're always excited about what he was going to say. Big exception to that. George could not tell a joke. And George would get ready to tell a joke, and we'd go, oh, man, here we go again. He had this uncanny ability to take a 20-second joke and turn it into a 30-minute story. At the time you got to the punchline, you forgot what the setup was, and you never could understand why nobody ever laughed at his jokes. But George, I'd have to tell you, was a good-hearted man. And George is a very smart, intelligent fellow, you know. His IQ is considerably better than mine. Not that that's any standard of excellence. But I have to say, we got him one day. Many of you remember Herman Roach. And Herman and I were singing in a quartet. Our tenor moved out of town or something. Oh, no, our tenor got ALS. So that was way out of town, yeah. So we're looking for a new tenor, and George, Herman said, well, I know this guy in my church choir. I wasn't coming here by then. And he said, we'll get him to sing tenor. Now, we thought we'd take a simple little song to start out with. It'd be real easy. And George looks at the sheet music for this song, and he says, A flat? I can't hit an A flat. And we tried it, and he was right. He couldn't. Now, people with perfect pitch, like Melanie, may not fully appreciate what we next did to her, what we next did to George. Herman suggested we just pitch the song in a lower key so that, started out in the key of F. He could hit it. Can you hit an F, George? Oh, yeah, I can hit an F. All right, so we pitched the song in F. And, of course, she had no problem. And then we go up to F sharp. He still hits it. I said, well, let's sing that again. We'll do it. We'll sing it in the same key. I'd blow the pitch pipe. I'd blow a G. As far as he knew, I was blowing the same note. He never noticed it. And we got him back up to the A flat, and he was hitting the note. He couldn't hit it before, but when he didn't know he was being scammed, he was able to do it. That day we eventually got him up to a B flat, and he never found out. And I think it was about 15 years later Herman fessed up. Third thing I want to say about George, in my 74 years on this planet, the only person ever who asked me to join his church, or not to join it, to attend his church, to come next Sunday to my church, the only person ever who said that to me was George Macintire. So, was George an evangelist? I don't know, preacher. But he snared one victim. Yeah, now we know who to blame.
How about George and your singing group when you put the play on over at the high school, and George played Tim Conway, the dentist?
Oh, yeah, that was great. He did such a great job with...
He may not be able to sing the F flat, but he sure could do that comedian out.
Oh, yeah, he did such a good job. We invited him back next year to play a fireman. Same Tim Conway skit, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, he was great in his Tim Conway impersonations. Well, I'd like to think that I have a lot of friends. I have a lot of friends at this church. I have a lot of friends at my golf club. I have a lot of friends. But 18 months ago, when I lost George Macintire, I lost a buddy. Hello, my name is George. My father was part of that story. But I want you to know that when I would call my home, my parents' house, I would call them home, and I would say, "It's George." My mom would call to my father, and say, "It's George on the phone. Come to the phone." And he would say, "George who?" Right? And she would say, "It's George." And she said, "Okay, I'll come back for George Macintire. I'll be right there." And no, it's George, your son. And I was second in my house to George. And I'm not saying that the people in Lewis are safer now than they were before, but I know there's not 4 people wandering around town singing chorus at a barbershop chorus during tourist season, making people who get ice cream pay dearly for the embarrassing option of being sung to. And we're clearing out my mom's house, and I opened a box today, and what I found in the bottom of the box was 4 red vests, 3 pairs of rubber nose and glasses, and a clown wig. And I know where it belonged. We'll miss him.
Let me say something about these wonderful gentlemen who sang. Herman was one of those wonderful men, and he put on one of those acts as well, one of which was a used car salesman. and and that was hilarious. And my beautiful wife here was part of that act as well, where windshield wipers would only work in reverse. She changed the act, but that was hilarious. But the gentlemen were so wonderful. They were dedicated so much so that they took an afternoon one day to go bedside to my dying sister, who has since passed. And that's one memory that my family will always be grateful for. And I thank George and Herman and Mike and another gentleman as well, Joe as well, for that day. And that's a day my family and I will never forget. Thank you. And George, God bless you. He's a gentleman in every aspect, and an honored man, honorable, and a model human being and Christian. And God bless you. Thank you.
So I'm going to stand up. I am Patsy's youngest cousin, and I'm young by a pretty long shot. So literally, I have known George all my life, because I was probably about, 4 or 5, maybe, when you got married. It was the first wedding I was ever at. Yeah, I had a cute little dress. Haven't worn one since. But anyway, I have idolized George all my life. And there was a time that we were both going through something pretty bad. I had torn up my knee and had total knee reconstruction. At the same time, George was going through recovery. And he was in his place, I was in my place. And he and I used to write lots of letters back and forth to each other. Just to support each other, let each other know that we love each other. And that's George. And I think he was the one that initiated the letters. And all I've known all my life is for George to be a very loving person who loved his family deeply and his Lord. So I just needed to share how much that George meant to me. the little cousin.
Hello, everybody. I'm Graham. I'm his. I'm his son-in-law. I'm married to Cordelia, and my son did the reading of the Corinthians. Was it? Yeah, he did a good job, mate. But anyway, so what I remember about George, he helped us get a house. And I ended up coming down to chop the chimney down out of the house because it was hanging there. So I got underneath the house. I got the jackhammer, the bloody, it came falling down and broke the drain. So he started laughing because when I plumbed it backwards. So I had to cut it off and do it again. But anyway, I worked really hard that day. We got all the bricks out, and we went to the dump, unloaded it, and I was thinking I could really kill a beer. And he hadn't had a drink for 30 years. But the best thing he said to me when I got back in the car, he goes, "It's Miller time." Which is like awesome. I was dying. But about telling jokes, he actually told me one. He managed to get it out. And it was kind of long-winded, but not as what he said. So I'm going to tell his joke, what he told me in the car. Okay? So, as he's not here, I'm going to tell it. So a duck walks into a grocery store. He goes, "You got any grapes?" And the grocer goes, "Of course I don't have any grapes. I only sell vegetables. So get out of here." So the duck comes in the next day. He goes, "Got any grapes?" He goes, "No, I don't have any grapes. Get out." So the duck comes in the next day. This goes on about 12 times, but I'll cut it short. And he goes, "Got any grapes?" He said, "If you come in again and ask me if I've got any grapes, I'm going to staple your beak to the wall." So he goes, "Okay." So the duck comes in the next day. He goes, "Got any staples?" He goes, "No." He said, "Okay, got any grapes?" Thank you.
Good afternoon. Excuse me? Do I have to? Okay. From 1956 until 1997, my husband ran and owned and operated the Franklin Hardware Store on 2nd Street in Lewis. Thank you. He became friends with George, and they were golfers, and when you talked about them golfing, reminded me that they were known as fishermen, because people said they didn't golf. All they did was fish the balls out of the pond. Bob passed away in March, and George passed away in April. They sang many, many times together. I think they started out with Bill Earl, and we're both tenors, but he'd hit the front door of the store, and he'd come in, and I would say, "Okay, here comes the entertainment." And the both of them would break out singing, and they were tenors, and they were very good. And we missed George, and I thought when Bob passed away, and we always have lived in Milton, I'm not going to see anybody from Lewis anymore, but do you know the Lewis people are following us to Milton? Meredith, George's daughter, is a neighbor of mine. I never see her, but we're neighbors. So that's what I had to say. But George was wonderful. Bob would say, "Get George's number." And I knew golfing. That was the day I had the afternoon to myself. Thank you.
Was that dread? I can, okay. My name is Melanie Bradley. I'm the organist and choir director here, if you don't know me, and was blessed to have George in the choir for the 19 years that I've been here. I actually have been doing both the choir and playing for, I think it was in 2009 that our choir director stepped down. And so there was a thought process. People in the choir weren't sure how they were going to be able to have one person do both, and I know George was a skeptic. But I was blessed that George loved me. And so he stayed, and he did whatever he could to support me. And I'm blessed that he's got 3 daughters, and he took me on as another one. Now, I did not have the same football experience that you did with him. I'm a Giants fan. Oh, now keep your moaning to yourself. We all have our things, okay? You would get the same response if you said that up in New York that you were an Eagles fan. So George and I, on the Sundays that the Eagles and Giants would play each other, would give each other a hard time. And we always had a bet that if Giants won, I'd get a kiss. If Eagles won, he would get a kiss. So we both kind of won. It's nothing weird, though. No. In church. It was all in church. It's all good. Choir witnessed and everything. I think I can speak for the choir that we all still hear George singing with us. There are just certain anthems where you just hear him singing, and I know he's singing up there. And the other thing that I will always remember, which is made now in emojis on your phone, you know, George used to, at the end of every service, he sat in the front row, and he'd be walking out, and he'd catch my eye, and he'd go like this to me. And so now, every time I see that in my emojis, I think of George. I actually have it in my text chain with him a couple times where he was not there that Sunday, and you guys would be away or something, and at 12 o'clock or whatever, when I would walk out of church and go check my phone, there was one of these because he knew I just finished my post.
I will say this about Melanie's relationship with my husband. She was going through cancer, and she still is and still needs our prayers. And I can tell you that every single night, now don't be offended, every single night he took the 2 poodles and went in the den, and the 3 of them prayed for you. And so, you know, you need to know that. And so since George isn't here, Ruckus and I still pray for you at night. So, and we all need to pray for Melanie. She's a beautiful person. And are you okay, Eric? You want to say something? No. Okay. Well, so thank you for that, Melanie. But yeah, she was kind of his 4th daughter. So. Does anybody, do you want to say what they did for Wendy? Can you share that?
I wasn't there, so I don't know.
Okay. What he did? Okay, yeah. He was a great guy. Anybody else want to share? You don't have to be shy. He loved all of you. Although Bob didn't get to meet him a whole lot, he shares Tom Lehrer with Bob, and I will give him the Tom Lehrer tapes. Okie dokie. What? This is my, well, actually.
No, that's part of my story. Don't say that.
I forgot to.
Hold on. I know that.
He's mine now.
Okay. First time I met Patsy and George. First time I met Patsy and George together at a Lewis High School prom, junior, senior, and I was trying to remember the name of the prom theme. Trying to remember the prom theme. It had something to do with the tropical dream, or something. You know how we kids are. But a lot of the class, I was Rehoboth High School. My date was Lewis. And so I didn't understand all the decorating they had to do for it. But we met right away. We met. I think we even went by and picked Patsy up. But anyhow, with Patsy and George, and I met your parents for the first time, Mr. and Mrs. Yost. But anyhow, we had a lovely evening, very successful, and we all had a great time and wonderful memories of that prom. Well, little did we know that night that they would have a daughter, and that I would have a son, who are seated right over there, and we're very thankful for both. I know we are. We love you. Yeah.
Is there anybody else? Are you all getting tired? No. Do any of my kids want to say anything? Any of my grandkids? They all love their grandfather very much. One of George's favorite things that he would say to his grandkids is, "Do you need money?" Is that what you're going to say? No.
No, I was not going to talk about the money. As much as it was appreciated.
I just want to say something. He's a wonderful, wonderful kid. He's in and out with me, and I love it when he's there. He keeps me company. I'm very, very proud of him. I'm very, very proud of Vaughn. Have you heard anything about your mom?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I'll talk to you later.
Okay.
To make it short, she's fine.
Okay.
Wow. It's been a while since I stood up in front of a crowd like this. I don't mean to give you all the stand-up routine. I'll just skip straight to the part about George. I am George's grandson, as she said, and he really was an amazing guy. And they talked a lot before about the jokes that he would tell, and because George was sort of a source of wisdom for me and grandparental guidance and advice, sometimes he would start on this long tangent, and I wouldn't know if I was getting like a heartfelt life lesson or just a poorly told joke at the end. And, there was something really fun about it because it always kind of kept you on your toes. You never really knew what you were getting into when you started a conversation with him. But it was always going somewhere interesting, and I mean, that's all I could really ask for. So I just want to say that, I didn't know that he had so many friends around his age. I only saw him, in relation to my own family and myself, and looking around this room and seeing all these people that I admittedly never met and kind of regret not meeting up until now. I just want to say that, I'm glad to see that his life was so much bigger than what I saw, and I plan on doing my absolute best to kind of carry on his legacy for, the rest of my own life.
He's a man of little words, so I'm very pleased that he wanted to get up and say something. And Hannah, do you think you could think of something to say? No, Hannah's very shy. She inherited shyness from my side of the family. Are you okay, sweetie? All right. You're not shy. I'm not shy. No, I work very hard at being extroverted. Oh, anybody else am I going to grab? And embarrass? How about Sandy and your story about what you thought George really was when you were growing up? You were telling everybody that your cousin was a pirate. I said, no, he's not a pirate. He's a pilot. Yes or no?
Yes. I have a lot of memories of George. I'm sorry. I have a lot of memories of George and Patsy when in their younger years. Patsy and George were dating, and Patsy really was after George, I think, pretty much, And I remember going over to see her father at the dock where he was working, and we were going to go fishing, supposedly. And George happened to be there with my Uncle Bob. And we just kept catching eels. And Patsy's screaming, "Oh, George, help us, help us." I don't know, do you remember this, Patsy, wherever you are? Okay. And
you're looking like she has no idea.
you don't remember? Oh, I remember this. And George would come out and unhook the eels for us and throw them back in the water. Well, we didn't live around here. We would come down and visit my cousins periodically. And so we went on, I think maybe David took us on a boat ride, and we went out to the pilot launch. And we were circling the launch, and my mom and dad were yelling, "Gigi, Gigi," and my aunt, their mother, just kind of reamed us out for calling him Gigi because, I guess he got kidded a lot about that afterwards. And I kind of remember you guys dating, him throwing ice cubes down Patsy's back. Yeah, oh yeah. Unfortunately, I moved away many, many years I was gone from the area. I had finally moved back, and I had a lot of nice visits lately with Patsy and George. My last memory of George and I were, we came down, I came down about, 3 years ago or so, and he and I just sat out on the back porch husking corn. And it was just so nice. And he's just a great guy. He really is. I saw George I always know where he stood in the choir because we always came to church here when I was here. But I have wonderful memories of two of you. And especially when you were all younger, but all through the years too. I mean, Patsy and David have always been my very favorite cousins. I always look forward to seeing them. It was a big treat when they come to Pennsylvania and see us. And roll down the cave at my grandparents' house. They had a cave and with a good hill, and we'd roll down it. But anyway, enough of that. Just wonderful memories of our family together. Mm-hmm. Or I could sing. Oh. Anybody else? Okay, I'm going to hand it back to the man in charge.